What is it?
It's time to go back.
Welcome.
Back to Generation S. It is a podcast about growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s. Put it this way, if you were walking around flipping the bird to your teachers because that's what Stone Cold Steve Austin did, this podcast is for you. I'm Dan Kemp, joined by my favorite co-host, or one of my favorite co-hosts. I can't say that too loud because my wife will hear me and she gets really jealous.
No, she's your favorite then. I'll take number 2. Or 1A and 1B.
My favorite non-legally bound co-host. How about that?
Yes. I'll accept that.
Perfect.
Thank you.
And fellow wrestling enthusiast, Lou Carnivale.
It's
Lou,
on my shirt.
welcome back.
Look at that. WrestleMania 20.
If you're watching this on YouTube, he's wearing his WrestleMania 20 shirt, which, by the way, I have seen him wear that shirt pretty consistently since I met you, Lou, in 2015.
Yes.
That's the original shirt, right?
This is an original WrestleMania 20 shirt.
Yeah, and we're almost to WrestleMania 40,
Disgusting.
just to give you some context.
Yeah.
Well, listen, today this is almost kind of a spiritual sequel to the first episode we did. Now, we did another wrestling episode around WrestleMania season where we ranked the WrestleManias of the 90s, but we're moving on up, baby. This is this is wrestling in the early 2000s, which honestly, for me, is what I consider my prime wrestling watching years, was from 2000-ish all the way to, I watched pretty regularly until 2008, and I still obviously keep up with it, but like for those 8 years, I was watching Monday Night Raw every single week. First it was Nitro, and then WCW went under, and then it was Raw until we graduated from college in 2009, so I guess it was 2009.
Yeah, and I would say my peak also was this time period also. Realistically, I would say 97 to 2005 was when I was the most into it.
Yeah. And I think it was kind of the best of both worlds. Before we started recording, you had a very good kind of, not an analogy, but I guess just a kind of a comparison of the different eras of wrestling. Because you had the golden era, the golden age, I guess, with Hogan and Savage and Ultimate Warrior. And then you had the new generation, which was Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Diesel, Razor Ramon. And then you had the Attitude Era, which was what everyone knows pro wrestling, for if you're younger than the age of 50, as far as like Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Triple H, D-Generation X, all that fun stuff. Then you move into what I like to call, for me, again, my prime wrestling years as far as watching, which was, called the Ruthless Aggression Era, which there's something in between there, right? As far as the Attitude and the Ruthless Aggression, there was kind of like a year where they were figuring things out still, right? From like 01 to 02.
Yeah, I call it the after party of Attitude.
Okay.
It was.
I like that.
Yeah, I figure that's like WrestleMania 18, and I'm sure we're going to touch on this, in a few moments in more detail, but like WrestleMania 18 was like the after party of everything WCW, ECW, Attitude of WWF, kind of coming to a close, getting ready for the next wave and crop of wrestlers, but also plugging in these veterans that have been around in other companies now kind of all under the same umbrella. So, Yeah, there was 01, 02 into even early 03. It was about maybe a 2-year transition of Attitude into Aggression.
Yeah, I think that's fair, because when I think Ruthless Aggression, the first wrestlers that come to mind are Brock Lesnar, John Cena, Batista, Orton, even Rob Van Dam, so guys that maybe were around, but they were featured much more prominently in this era. But yeah, I guess the big three are Lesnar, Cena, and Orton, and Batista. So there's 4 of them there that are like the kind of the poster children, the probably the best class coming out of developmental Ohio Valley wrestling, in my opinion. Yeah,
no doubt. Jim Cornette was running the show down there, and he's got a great eye for talent. And yeah, I don't think anybody ever will be able to match that. Although, as we're talking out loud, the precursor to NXT was called Florida Championship Wrestling, and they had Dean Ambrose, Jon Moxley. They had
Yep.
Seth Rollins, and they had Roman Reigns, Bray Wyatt. So, I mean, but
That's true.
The 4 that you just mentioned, and there's other guys
Yeah.
that came out with that Lesnar, Orton, Batista group, like Shelton Benjamin.
There's Shelton Benjamin. As I was going to say that, you're right.
there's some
Charlie Haas, right? Was that OVW or?
Yeah, he was. There was a slew of guys that came out of OVW during that time period. But
Yep.
there was a certain vibe in the early 2000s because WWF was firing on all cylinders, like big time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Red freaking hot as it could be, even with an injured Steve Austin as we rolled into the turn of the new millennium. WCW was there. They were there.
That's probably the best way to put it.
That's more of you.
But that's when I started watching it, though, and I loved it. I didn't realize how bad it was until I went back and watched earlier episodes of, Nitro or whatever, because it's all I knew, and I loved it.
Yeah, it was, WCW was there, and that's the thing. I feel like you can talk more about WCW.
Yes.
I can talk more about ECW, but we both can talk about the WWF.
I can probably talk about the WWF really after they purchased WCW.
Yeah.
Because up until then, I didn't watch.
About it.
Oh, I could 100% talk about it. Yes, absolutely. And I just had a thought, too. I don't know why this is just randomly coming up, but we've been talking about these different eras as far as the Golden Age and the new generation. If WCW is still around, or even more unlikely, but if WCW won and the WWF was done, where there was that risk. Well, I know, but what I'm saying is, would we still refer to these different eras as such? Would there be an attitude era if it was WCW?
If WCW,
what would you call it though?
If WCW won the war, there wouldn't have been an attitude era. They would have closed up shop probably 96, 97, and there's been multiple stories by Jim Cornette and Jim Ross that things were really bad. And one of the more famous stories by Cornette is, I think, in like 95, 96-ish. Don't quote me on the exact year. That he said that the things were so bad in Titan Towers, which is where the headquarters of WWEFG is. Now it's just, I don't think it's even called Titan Towers anymore. But either way, that they were, taking the water coolers out. I don't know if that's actually true or that's just for, trying to explain and make a point of like things were that bad. They were thinking about taking out the water coolers. I don't know. But either way, whether they literally did it or figuratively did it, just that line by itself by Jim Cornette is enough to make you go, oh, geez, things were really bad. So, no, if WCW won the war, it would have been before you even got real attitude.
That's true, because the only reason they started, we keep calling it the war, but the only reason they started coming back in the TV ratings was because they brought in this new attitude, obviously inspired by ECW. There's no denying that.
Where did they get that from?
100%. Yeah, it's ECW was the inspiration, but they were able to take it to a kind of a big stage, and obviously proved to work out very well. WCW did not adapt as quickly, and I don't think that was through, I think part of it was through their booking, but I think honestly, especially in the late 98, all of 99, 2000, like they were pretty much hampered by AOL and Time Warner with that whole merger.
Yep.
And it was a totally different company at that point, and you could see it on TV.
Yes.
Like, again, I started watching during this era, so I knew no different. But when I went back and watched early episodes of WCW Nitro, or maybe even like 97, 98, the NWO was hot. It just looked like a totally different product. Like you couldn't believe it was the same show with how different things ended up looking. But I think, again, a big part of that was the way standards and practices from AOL Time Warner came down and said, no, you can't do this. You can't do this. Your budget's been cut in half. So I think it was a lot of factors. Now, the problem is if you're a WWF fan, WWE fan, and all you do is kind of watch their perception or their perspective on how it all went down, they're going to put it in a very different light, right? They're going to paint themselves as like, oh, the underdogs that came back. And part of that is true, but part of that was also WCW, got screwed over internally.
They got their hands tied.
And so, when all was said and done and they were up for sale for only $4 million, like, yeah, of course WWF won. Part of that was them winning in the ratings, yes, but the other part was...
I'd take out a loan if they were worth $4 million. That's not a lot of
$4
money.
million loan. Well, in this day and age, you think how much was it 20 years ago?
It was like 7.5. I did the math before.
All right, so still not that much.
It's not.
Yeah.
Considering, how about this? So going into modern wrestling for a moment. So obviously we're recording this in May of 2023. Tony Khan's the owner of AEW. He bought Ring of Honor about a year, give or take, ago for $4 million.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, obviously, it's not the same $4 million that Vince McMahon bought WCW in 01 for, adjusted for inflation as of last year, because I did it for 2022 when Tony Khan bought Ring of Honor. $4 million in 01 into 22 was like $7.5 million. So think about that. That Khan bought it for a little under $4 million for ROH, and $7.5 million is what you would pay today for WCW. That makes it even more mind-boggling.
It's way too close. Yeah, that's way too close
Ring
of a
Honor
margin there.
and WCW,
considering,
with just the tape library by itself and the rights to make action figures and T-shirts and all. Whew. Okay, like that's just still. I just don't.
I mean,
get
it was a big deal because that's the thing. Yeah, you had WCW was a true competitor, and you can say what you want about AEW, and maybe they're getting closer, but they were really the only thing that was actually a competitor to WWE and beat them at their own game for over a year.
Yeah,
nobody's done that since, and they probably won't. Now that WWE's been sold to what is it called, the big company that owns
guys
the UFC.
that also own the UFC. I can't remember their names, but the parent company of the UFC.
Yeah, so now that they own them, who knows? I mean, that could
which
just
is
change
ironic
things entirely.
because Shane McMahon wanted to buy the UFC at some point in the 90s.
I do remember that, and Vince was like, "No, we're not doing that."
And also, Shane wanted to buy ECW and just put it on, keep it exactly the way it was, and just put it on WWF.com. And Vince shot that down too.
Yep.
So, but don't worry, Shane McMahon bought WCW.
Yeah, that's right. The name on the contract said McMahon.
Yeah.
God, I remember that too. So, I guess let's start there because that was 2001. We could talk 2000, I guess.
Let's start with the downfall of WCW, and then I can go over the weird anomaly of business that was ECW in the 2000s because it doesn't make any sense. Whether you know nothing about, even if you know nothing about pro wrestling, if you just listen to what ECW was doing in 2000, oh, that's great. Well, they closed at the end of the year. Like, oh, how the hell did that happen?
Right. Yeah. Everything seemed good on paper, and all of a sudden they're out. So okay. Well, we'll start with WCW. So again, I started watching, and I mentioned this on our very first episode almost a year ago. I started watching in early 2000. That was my earliest memories, was like 2000. And I remember that because every single pay-per-view that they hyped had 2000 in it. You had Super Brawl 2000, Sold Out 2000, Bash of the Beach 2000. You had all these. Anyway, so that's when I remember it. The NWO was on its last legs again with NWO. It was called NWO 2000.
Of course.
And it was the black and the silver instead of black and white.
Yeah.
And I had heard of the NWO. I knew the NWO, so I said, "Oh, of course, the NWO is here." But I didn't realize that this was like the really shitty version of the NWO,
like version 4 at this point. It really was.
I think so. And
because you had black and white, you had the original, then you had the Wolf Pack, then you had the white and the Wolf Pack together. I grouped that as number 3,
the Elite.
Yep. Fun. Yeah, I didn't realize that the Elite, NWO Elite.
Yeah.
And then the silver and black version. But it's funny that they had the word 2000s in every pay-per-view and everything they did. They must have gotten that idea from Nintendo 64 and Wave Race 64 and Mario 64.
Everything was 64. Yeah. Well, and even before that, everything on Super Nintendo was Super Castlevania, Super Metroid, Super Mario Kart.
Super Contra, yep.
So, listen, if it works, you run with it, because they weren't the only company putting 2000 on things to make it sound cool.
Yeah, they definitely were.
But yeah, so the NWO at that point was Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Jeff Jarrett, Bret Hart, Scott Steiner, and the Harris brothers, Ron and Don. So that's what I thought was, this is the epitome of the NWO right here, because that's all I knew.
And then, late to the party. This is the NWO from '97.
I was like, hey guys, can we get NWO? Oh, we have NWO at home. This was the NWO that I had at home. And so having no clue about how big they were, because again, you couldn't watch reruns. They didn't show reruns of Nitro, so I didn't know. I just, I'd go by what I heard.
Yeah.
in, you know, all the stuff my friends talked about in school, and I wanted to be cool, so I started watching wrestling. And so, you know, Sting was around at the time. Hulk Hogan was red and yellow, so I remember he was Hollywood Hogan for a little bit, and I guess he had gone back, and so he was...
Is this the era when they had that really weird logo that you really can't make out what it is, and that entrance set that people fell down off of and would slip on?
That's the logo I associate with WCW.
Wow. So you actually, never even saw like the traditional... like stanchion, so to speak, entrance with like the 2 block letters WCW on each side.
Never. This is the only one I knew. And it had the flames on the ring mats, and it was, I know.
That was
cool.
This is all
I knew. And
I will say that.
I mean,
the ring mat and everything that they did when they like redid the logo and Nitro and all that was actually really cool. But then the bell rang.
Well, and here's the thing too. The bell rang, but the matches themselves were great for the most part. Like, I mean, there were some stupid matches, but you had a lot of talented wrestlers at this time that were, you know, maybe it was too little too late, but, you know, this was around the time that Booker T started getting popular.
Oh, yeah. Booker deserved
was moving towards 100%.
100%.
I caught the tail end of, you know, you had Benoit and Malenko and Saturn. They were just before they left.
Yep.
So I caught them at the end there.
Cruiserweights.
And then I still, again, the cruiserweights were always great.
Always from beginning. That was the one thing in WCW that never got bad. I mean, there was a couple matches that were a cluster, but overall, there was never really like, oh man, the cruiserweights are on. Like, no, the cruiserweights are on. This is great.
It was always fun. No, they 100%. And I think that's, you know, without that, you wouldn't have like the TNA X division.
Oh, no,
I mean,
granted,
TNA X division wasn't about weight limits.
It's about no limits. That's a good marketing. That's because Samoa Joe walked in. It's like, weight limits. Like,
I'm going to take this.
Yeah, I'm just going to conquer this for the next 2 years or something like that.
Right. Yeah. So, it was a very interesting time. And again, I loved watching the matches. I will say, just as far as watching a WCW match, the WCW had the best wrestling ring sound when the guy would take a bump of any other wrestling company, in my opinion.
You haven't watched a lot of ECW from that era. You've only watched ECW from 97, where it's like if a that's good English, thumbtack drops on the mat and makes a sound. That's too much. Yeah. And then before that, it was too little. You watch 98, 99, 2000 ECW, it's a good sounding mat. But I agree. I will at least say the WCW mat sounded better than the WWF mat, hands down.
Yes. And it was less bouncy, too, which is probably not good for the wrestlers.
Yeah.
But it didn't bounce as much, whereas I remember I would switch over to Raw and be like, this ring is massive, and the ropes are shaking, and it's just bouncing all around. What are they, on a trampoline? Because that's what it looked like. And which is funny, because WWF back in the mid-90s had a very stiff mat, and I think they switched it to this more bouncy one for the health of the wrestlers. Mm-hmm. Whereas, again, WCW's mat, it just looked like it. Anytime Kevin Nash powerbombed somebody in WCW, I felt that because it just looked like it hurt.
The other thing I liked about WCW was they put and WWF only did this for one pay-per-view. I wonder if you know which one it is. Logos on the mat itself that the guys were wrestling on.
It's the only WWF pay-per-view I watched as a kid because I owned it on VHS. It was WrestleMania 12.
Yes, that was the only one that I truly think they ever did. ECW did it a little bit here and there, probably when they found some extra funds. Literally, it probably was that. Like, oh, we have an extra $500. Oh, screw it. Put the logo on the mat. I like that WCW did it, but you haven't touched on, or do you want me to interject a little bit for ECW here? You haven't touched on Mr. Russo yet.
I haven't, and I didn't. I mean, we could. So basically, So Vince Russo was a writer for WCW, a booker that had come over from the WWF. He was a writer there. He booked a lot of the really crazy storylines that happened in the Attitude Era. Mm-hmm. And WCW said, "Oh, well, this guy did great for them. Let's get him over here, and he'll do great for us." And so he came in, and some of the stuff he did, was good. But I think what happened was, from what I've always heard, Vince McMahon always had the final say, no matter what. If a writer pitched something, he had to approve it. Whereas in WCW, you didn't have a head honcho that was having to sign off on everything, for better or for worse. And so Vince Russo was basically given carte blanche, could free reign to do whatever he wanted. And you'd notice really quickly that, hey, there's a reason not all of his ideas got approved, because some of his stuff was
Judy Bagwell
just outrageous. Yeah, it was either outrageous or just plain stupid. Honestly, the stupidest match I remember watching was the pinata on a pole match for the cruiserweight title.
Yeah, not good.
And you had that guy Oklahoma who was basically just making fun of Jim Ross. Ed Farrar was his name. He was a writer as well.
Yep.
And he was playing a character that basically made fun of Jim Ross's Bell's palsy, which again was all Russo's idea. And it was bad. So you had. I'll sum this up because we could talk about the end of WCW forever. In fact, maybe we'll do it as its own thing for a separate podcast thing on YouTube or something. But I'll say this: the matches were inconsistent. There were some amazing matches, but there were some matches that just didn't make any sense. Whether they had stupid rules or the wrestlers themselves weren't always the greatest. It's a shame because you had some of my favorite wrestlers on there. You had Sting, who was still wrestling all the way to the end. You had Ric Flair. You had Booker T. You had Kevin Nash. I've always loved Kevin Nash. You had Goldberg.
Scott Steiner.
Yeah, basically Scott Steiner had finally getting a main event push right at the end there. So if they were able to hold on a little bit longer, I feel like they could have come out of that funk and done something. Right? Because, but it just, the way it happened, again, talking about behind the scenes, they got screwed over so hard by that Time Warner AOL merger that they didn't want the product anymore. They were like, all right, we're just going to rid ourselves of this. We're going to put it up for sale and that'll be the end of it. And so WWF apparently had first right to refuse an offer, as long as they made a reasonable offer, which they did. They bought it. And that was that. And then I remember watching the last Nitro, which is funny because I watched it and then I didn't think about it for years because I didn't tape it or anything. And I remember you told me, like, I actually have a tape of the last WCW Nitro. Do you want to borrow it? I was like, hell yeah, I do. And so, it had been like, I guess, 5 or 6 years since I had seen it.
Yep.
And so I finally rewatched it because, again, back then you couldn't just stream everything on the network because there was no network. And man, it was such a weird event because you had Shane McMahon coming out at the end and you had Vince McMahon popping in and out.
And
it
you
was
had
just
Paul Heyman on commentary.
So surreal.
How about that?
Yeah. So it was a whole weird thing. And my God. Yeah. So that was a really weird ending to my favorite wrestling company that, it's, what can I say? It's just, it's a real shame because of that, we had a monopoly in wrestling for decades, technically. I mean, we'll say, at least 10 years. No, let's be honest. They're still pretty much monopolizing. AEW, as I said before, is coming close, but
they're going to
WWE
pull
is still
70,000 in Wembley Stadium this summer. So,
well, and that's true, but how does that translate over to popularity in the U.S.? I don't know. And I guess if you're thinking about things at a global scale, then maybe they're getting closer to WWE. Who knows?
To go into, there's a couple things I want to go off of what you just said. The first thing is the sale of WCW. And I agree. WCW didn't do any favors for themselves. They shot them in the foot with a lot of things. The first and foremost was there was no filter for Russo, for Ferrara, for any writers. In ECW, the boss was Paul Heyman. It stopped with Paul.
Yeah.
And obviously in WWE was Vince, is Vince. Always will be Vince. Until he's
apparently
literally
mustache or no mustache.
Yeah. Who is this? It's nobody. And
it's
AEW
Vince McMahon.
Yeah, And AEW, as much as people want to joke around with Tony Khan, he's still the boss. That the final decision is coming from Tony Khan. So that was the first thing.
In TNA, Dixie Carter was, or for better or for worse.
And then first Jeff Jarrett and then Dixie Carter, but they were still a chain of command. Yeah. That was the first thing I heard WCW. The second thing was, like you said, that Time Warner just wanted it out for whatever reason. Well, not whatever reason. They lost millions and millions of dollars. They didn't want to even remotely entertain the idea, so they wanted out completely. And then Eric Bischoff put in an offer to buy them. For like $20 million. But part of the agreement was they were at least going to have Monday Nitro. They were going to have that time slot, and they were going to be able to shop around the other shows, Thunder or Saturday Night or Worldwide or whatever else they wanted to do. They were going to be able to shop them around to other networks. But then Vince came in and said, well, you're getting $20 million, but you still have to deal with this issue. I'll give you $4 million. And take it off your hands. They went, fine, be done.
And they were like, done. Yeah.
That's
exactly
shows how little faith they had in WCW at the time, which going off of what you said, well, could they have turned the corner? Yeah, but they would have had to have gone dark for a while. And jumping forward, the technology wasn't there yet. There was a time, and we'll get to this later, but the moment is here for me to talk about this. TNA, when they did their weekly pay-per-views, and then they bought their, they bought their time slot on Fox Sports Net, and then they had a time where they were going to go to Spike TV. There was a gap between Fox Sports and Spike TV, but the technology was there at the time that you could stream their show on their website, and they did a pay-per-view. It was actually what's regarded as the greatest TNA match of all time. Samoa Joe, Chris Daniels, and AJ Styles.
That's Destination X, right?
Unbreakable, close.
Unbreakable,
Unbreakable,
yep, okay.
And the main event was Rhino and Raven, so they pulled out like the biggest stars they had at the time because they were in the dark. They didn't have TV, but people could get it a little bit. You could go on the website and find it some way, shape, or form. WCW wouldn't have that luxury. It just wasn't there in early 01 to, we're going to go dark and they'll be able to find us online. Yeah, you could, but you're not watching full matches or even highlights at that point.
Nobody had the internet connectivity to even do it if they did it. You know what I mean? Because they had live webcasts, but again, the quality was terrible.
You weren't watching.
And it wouldn't have been the same.
You weren't watching good stuff. Even when, I kind of want to look into that. Is what did TNA look like for that? I don't know. I think it was like a month or so. It wasn't very long, but long enough that you would go, oh, geez, well, we got to do a couple weeks of TV and a pay-per-view without actually having TV until we get our TV. Right. But it wasn't there at the time. So it bothered me too, just as a wrestling fan. You said, I think you hit the nail on the head. You said that there was people that were just WWF fans or just and it's wrestling fans like me and you. We watch a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
So I'm
not going to lie though, like it took me a minute, like, cause I was the WCW fan.
Yeah.
And then when WWF bought them, I'm like, all right, do I keep watching? And I'm like, all right, I'm going to keep watching. And honestly, you know why? Is because of that end of that last Nitro where they had the simulcast of WWF and WCW. I'm like, all right, I'm thinking they're going to do something with this. I'm going to stick around and see how they handle it. And a few months went by, and then I remember, because Shane McMahon bought it, and then I remember he interrupted Kurt Angle's like Olympic ceremony for winning.
Oh, great matches they had.
Oh, well, no, but I'm trying to think of why Angle had a celebration, and this was before he fought Shane McMahon.
Yeah.
But at King of the Ring, which is one of my favorite matches of all time, by the way. But why was he celebrating in the ring? Do you remember? Because he had like a medal ceremony for something.
I don't know.
Do you remember why?
Maybe he was reenacting because he was going to become a King of the Ring winner again?
That might have been, because I remember Shane showed up and was like, he's going to hype WCW. He starts talking about WCW.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is it. And then Angle slams him down, and then, nothing happens. And then it was just a few weeks later that you started having WCW guys show up on TV, right?
And the first two guys, were ECW, WCW wrestlers. So it wasn't really like, I think the first one was Lance Storm.
It was. And and the second one was Hugh Morris.
Okay. And then Mike Awesome.
That was a WCW guy. And then Mike Awesome, which, but to me, those were WCW guys.
And to me, I'm like, no, they are not. They are not WCW guys. So
because you were watching. So, and I know I totally derailed what you were saying.
It's okay.
But I just had to say that I was not a wrestling fan. I was a WCW fan that liked wrestling. And so I had to make myself watch it. Yeah. And obviously, I never stopped.
So that's interesting that you were a WCW fan, but you didn't follow the breadcrumbs to TNA. Because TNA...
a little bit. I didn't have good internet. That was the problem. I had dial-up for so many years that I couldn't watch anything online. Mm-hmm. And then I finally heard about... I was like, wait a second. So wait, hold on. Jeff Jarrett's still wrestling? He's not on... So what's he... And then wait, what's Stink? So I would find pictures of them doing that at TNA shows. I'm like, what is this TNA wrestling? Where can I find this? And so... Honestly, it took me forever to find their website.
Yeah.
Like and then I couldn't. Yeah, and then I didn't have cable, so even if they were on Spike, I didn't have cable at the time. Yeah. Well, they didn't go to Spike till later.
Fox Sports.
My parents
would have been the first opportunity for you to watch them on TV.
Yeah, but I didn't have that, and I couldn't. They wouldn't let me. We didn't have good internet, and I couldn't. A and B, they wouldn't let me buy the pay for the pay-per-view events.
Yeah.
So I didn't, and you couldn't really watch video clips back then, so it was kind of a mystery. Like, I would see this TNA, I would see random WCW guys show up, and then I went back to watching WWF.
Yeah. If it was more accessible, you probably would have been a TNA fan from day one.
Probably, because to me, TNA was almost like the very spiritual, and I'm going to emphasize spiritual successor to what WCW wanted to be.
Yes, and you're right, because if you have WCW, TNA is the successor to it.
Yes.
ECW successor is ROH in a weird way.
I 100% agree. Yes, because you had the wrestling. I mean, yeah, 100% agree.
Now I'm going to go into that because they changed their business model based on kind of the same thing. So my first exposure to ECW was Pro Wrestling Illustrated. You know, seeing those black and white photos of, I remember seeing, it was probably Super Crazy doing a Hurricane Run off the top rope, but it was a still image, so his legs were like off the top rope like that. He was like jumping onto the guy like vertically, like horizontally. Just that image, I'm like, well, what the hell? I didn't even know what he was doing. I'm like, is he being thrown? Is he jumping on the guy? I remember that very vividly. And then obviously the blood and guts. And in black and white, it actually does look a little bit more gruesome. The blood. The Sabu with the barbed wire.
Because you're imagining it looking even worse than it probably actually would.
Yes. It's like most of it's dried blood, but it's still blood. Sabu being Sabu. The half-naked women. So that was the thing that struck me about them was like, okay, it's violent. Like, it's very violent. And I'm probably looking at the PWIs in 97, 98. This is when you still had Sabu and Terry Funk there, and they're doing the barbed wire stuff and the blood and guts. It was like, well, it's more violent. It has even more of a sex appeal than WWF. WCW never had anything. They never even touched anything with the women.
Nope.
But I wasn't allowed to watch it because they marketed themselves too good, and I wasn't allowed to watch it. Finally, I want to say early 99, my dad recorded an episode of ECW on MSG, which is the regional network for the Rangers and the Knicks in New York, and they were on at like 11 or midnight on Saturday nights. And I saw Tommy Dreamer versus Lance Storm with some chick named Dawn Marie. I don't know if you know I like her or not. And it blew me away. I'm like, what is this? It's like they're doing what they're doing in the WWF with like the ladders and the tables and the chairs, but like they're doing it better.
Yes.
So I got hooked on it, but I only had one episode. I still wasn't really allowed to watch it. But then they got to TNN in late 99. Well, summer of 99. And they had to tone down what was going on because now you have a network and you have sponsors, and the network has sponsors for your show and for other show, what comes before you, what comes after you. So they toned it down, and I think they toned it down for the better. You had more in-ring action. You had more technicians, like, Van Dam. I mean, Van Dam could do crazy stuff, but if he wants to be, he could be a technician. You had guys like Lance Storm. You had guys like Jerry Lynn that can actually wrestle, where you had guys like New Jack, who was there to hit you with a baseball bat, so to speak. It was a good blend then. But this is where it gets weird. So in 2000, they're having trouble with their network, just like WCW.
Yep.
And it was a mirror image of, things weren't working out. But unlike WCW, well, maybe you can answer this. Was there a moment, because there is a moment in ECW, and not a lot of people know this. Do you know of like a single moment or storyline or hiring decision that made AOL Time Warner or the branch of WCW go, oh, hold on, we can't be doing this, or this is not a good move, or this is very bad? Because there is a moment in ECW that TNN went, what the hell are you doing? And I'll get to that in a moment.
So
but I want to see if this WCW did anything like that.
I'm trying to think. I don't remember there being a specific moment of like, okay, this is the reason that they came down and said, no, you can't do that. I remember it was because it was an interview I watched with Eric Bischoff where he was talking about it was like late 98 and he was brought into an office, an executive meeting, and it was a bunch of executives that he had never met before. And all of a sudden they were telling him how he had to run his show and what budget he now had. and was like, you need to do this. We can't swear anymore. There's no more blood. So basically everything he wanted to do, he couldn't do anymore. So I'm trying to think of like a specific thing. I don't think WCW had a specific moment that I know of that made them go in that direction, apart from this is the new company that's running it.
Yeah.
And this is what they want to do. And that's that.
All right. I'm going to go on a soapbox for a moment about my favorite lady in wrestling, because there is a reason why. There is a reason why. So if you've ever watched on the WWE network, there is a OMG, I guess it was a DVD when DVDs were still coming out. OMG, the top, I think, 100 moments in WWE history. And I had to watch what I'm saying here because YouTube flags things. So if you can't figure out what I'm saying, give it a Google. One of the things that was left off the list involved Dawn Marie and Tori Wilson.
Okay.
It was, and that was the thing, it was too controversial to even put on a modern DVD because there was a little romance between Dawn Marie and Tori. Give it a Google.
I remember that.
Not on your work phone or your work laptop. Do it at home. But it pushed the envelope, even if it was on pay-per-view. It was still WWE programming, and it was pretty intense for the time. Even still, I think it would be intense for the time. The reason I'm mentioning that is because they came out with an OMG list for ECW, which was, whoa, okay, we're going there. We're going to do this. I guess WWE has a thing with sexuality over violence because, here we go, one of the first things that TNN said, hey, what are you doing? There was a in-ring, how do I say this? It wasn't like an interview. It was basically Sunny came back to ECW. She was attacked by Lita. I believe her name in ECW was Miss Congeniality or Angelica or Angela or something like that.
No, it was Miss Congeniality. I remember that.
Yes, and Dawn Marie. And it was, even to this day, I say one of the more graphic things you've ever seen sexually in pro wrestling, where a skirt was lifted up and there was a paddle involved. Fill in the blanks. TNN went, no, you can't do that. So it's interesting that Dawn Marie was involved with a storyline in WWE that's too controversial to be on their top 100 list, and was also in a segment in ECW that almost got them kicked off TNN that was too controversial to be on that list. But either way, that was the start of the issue with TNN, was them going, you can't do this. So there was a start point for ECW kind of having their trouble with their network, and then it just went downhill. And then TNN was negotiating with the WWF to come on board with them the following year because ECW only signed a one-year deal. Did you know about that?
I did, yeah. I knew it was only a 1-year deal.
And, WCW was established. They had their video games already, right? They had some great games. They had their toys. They had their action figures. They had their magazine. They had their CDs. Almost all of that from ECW came out in 2000. The action figures, the DVD, their DVD distribution, their
video
CD,
games.
their video games came out all in 2000. But they lost their TNN deal, and then they slowly just fizzled. It's like, but you just did record numbers across the board, and now you're done, which is the stark contrast to WCW doing record lows. ECW was doing record profits, which still to this day baffles a lot of people of, well, we know they were funded by the WWE, but they literally just, once WCW raised the white flag, they pulled the plug on ECW and said, okay, we're done. Let's all put it all in one house now.
Yeah, and that's basically what happened.
That is what happened. And it was disappointing because I felt like, and a lot of guys jumped from ECW to your ship, Lance Storm, Mike Awesome, and they just weren't able to capitalize on those wrestlers very well. It just didn't work out because they were just a train wreck for a while.
Well, I was going to say, I think if they had given it more time and actually, again, we talked about how they pushed Scott Steiner at the end there, Booker T, Lance Storm. I think he was definitely going to be in line for a main event push. Mike Awesome, same thing. So I think if they had just let it breathe, if WCW had a one or maybe 2 more years where before they had, potentially were going to go under, I think they could have saved it with the talent they're bringing in, and finally, too little, too late, but pushing these younger stars and finally not relying on, Hulk Hogan, Lex Luger, Kevin Nash, DDP as much. You know what I mean?
The other thing is, let's say, for example, that WCW was able to either A, get another year or so, or B, I would say even better, if Bischoff bought it. If
Bischoff bought it, totally different game.
Yeah, and he was able to shop around Thunder, and you could have made the Thunder the more adult-orientated show, because let's say that they did survive, and ECW truly did fail in the beginning of 01. Not all, a lot of those wrestlers probably would have went to WCW. There was a rumor that Van Dam had an agreement with WCW like in February of 01.
Oh, really?
RVD was going to WCW because a lot of guys did not want to go to the WWF. So I think there would have been a good chunk. And then you're bringing in those guys, and not a lot of them would have been main event talent. Van Dam would have been, maybe Rhino would have been, but most of them would have been solid mid-carders with experience.
Yeah.
There would have been a lot of potential there for WCW to absorb if they had the assets, which apparently they would have had the financial backing to bring on some of these guys, but didn't happen. And we got the invasion angle, and they're kind of like the morphing and the end of that Attitude Era into the in-between, the after party, and then the Ruthless Aggression Era.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I guess as messy as it was, that was kind of really the start of, the new era of wrestling.
Yeah.
With WWF becoming WWE, with TNA, with Ring of... I guess we can talk about Ring of Honor. I didn't watch it, so I don't
Nobody
really have
did, because they were never on TV. They've always been in
No, it was an indie.
syndication.
It was an indie show that got a lot of traction and had really big names that wanted to come wrestle there.
Yeah, and guys that
that
became really big names, like Samoa Joe, like CM Punk, like Tyler Black,
Bryan Danielson,
which became Seth Rollins. Yeah,
Brian Danielson.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Bryan Danielson.
Yeah. So no, you're right. So let's talk, because there's a lot of things I want to. God,
there's a lot. We can make this like a 5-hour show.
I know. So I guess we'll go through the Ruthless Aggression era and kind of just we'll focus on WWE first for now, and just talk about maybe some of our favorite wrestlers, our favorite feuds, our favorite events. Yeah. I do want to cover in this episode the video games a little bit, at least, because in my opinion, this era put out some of the best wrestling video games ever made to this day.
Now, are you saying just the Ruthless Aggression or just the 2000s in general? Once that clock,
I think I think the early I think from 2000 to 2008 had some of the best wrestling games ever created.
You had variety. You did. No matter what you liked, no matter what hat you put on, your company had a game. There was two ECW games. There were, I think, at least 4 WCW games
not in 2000. In the 2000s, you had Mayhem and Backstage Assault, and they were both. Mayhem was okay. Backstage Assault was garbage,
but you still had the options.
Yeah. But I honestly, when I think of the best wrestling games of the 2000s, as far as that window, I think like No Mercy in 01 when that came out.
Yep.
I think
came out in 01?
No, pardon. Yeah, I know, right?
Jeez.
And then was it 2000? I don't know.
Maybe.
It was 01, I remember. And then it was and then SmackDown Here Comes the Pain, obviously.
Yeah.
Really any of the SmackDown games, they just got better and better.
They did.
And then I guess those are the to me, yeah, basically all the WWE games were the best wrestling games.
Sure.
You had a TNA game that we played. That was really more so in college, so I guess that was kind of after, the era that we're talking about, but still part of it.
Yeah.
You had the Legends of Wrestling games. Do you remember those?
I did. I definitely had the first one, and I don't know. I'm fairly certain
they're terrible.
this. They are. They're terrible. But they were supposed to be ECW's game on the PS2, which is
Yes.
why Rob Van Dam is in the Legends of Wrestling game, because obviously if you're making an ECW game,
And Sabu.
And Sabu, he's probably going to make a hidden character or something like that for the ECW game. But yeah, Legends of Wrestling was supposed to be ECW on PS2, and wasn't Def Jam Vendetta or Fight for New York supposed to be WCW?
Yes, Def Jam Vendetta was supposed to be WCW's new, I forget what, I think they were going to call it Revenge 2, or I don't remember what they're going to call it, but yeah, it was supposed to be, that engine was supposed to be the next WCW game, and they made Def Jam, I totally forgot about those. The Def Jam games are amazing.
Yeah,
some of my favorite wrestling games of all time.
You just look at the 2000s in general, and I know we're going a little bit further than we do on the show, but for this conversation, starting with 2000 going to 2009, which was probably the TNA game, was when we were at the end of college, so probably 8 or 9. 2008.
It was like fall of 08, I think is when we bought it.
So that was probably the last. I mean, there was another, probably a SmackDown versus Raw. SDVS, RAW, FECW, SmackDown versus Raw, featuring ECW. Just rolls right off the tongue.
Off the tongue.
But you had that, starting with WCW, ECW even got their feet wet. Def Jam had their games, Legends of Wrestling, WWF into WWE, even TNA is crazy. Now knowing
there's more, by the way.
Oh, sure.
Did you know that there's another one?
What?
Do you remember Backyard Wrestling?
I was just going to say that because I was at a mom and pop video game store and I saw that with New Jack on the cover.
Oh, such a terrible game.
Never played it.
You're not missing much.
I'm probably not. Which do you think is the bigger of the two surprises that one of the companies got a game? Is it more surprising now knowing more about ECW from watching it, in general and just with me? Is it more surprising that ECW got a game or TNA got a game?
That's a good question. I would say, I don't know, because because I played the ECW game, I never watched ECW, but I owned it. I owned the first one on PlayStation.
Yep.
And I thought it was fun. I was like, oh, this is just like WWF Attitude. So I assumed that they were a very successful company because they had a video game. But now looking back on where they were just a couple years prior, I'm like, how the hell did these guys get a video game?
That is very true.
You know what I mean?
And that was what I was going to say.
Now, but on the flip side, TNA was never super popular. You always felt like you're a part of kind of an elite club when you watched TNA. And so the fact that they got a video game released by Midway, aka the guys who made Mortal Kombat, you're like, all right, it's kind of a big deal, kind of out of left field. I remember when I first saw TNA action figures, I thought that was a bigger deal. I was surprised to see those because of how non-mainstream I thought TNA was.
That is true. I feel like ECW had a bigger, and I agree, actually, just thinking it in my head before I even said it, I agree. ECW had a bigger following overall, but TNA was more accessible, was more polished. And the thing is, if that game came out in, let's say, like you said, 08. So if you look at TNA in 2006, and at that point, they were on Spike TV, I want to say. I
think so, early.
Yeah, if I told you in 2006 when they were on Spike TV, I'm like, hey, in 2 years, these guys are going to have a video game. You'd be like, well, maybe. If somebody told you in the game came out in 2000, in 1998, ECW was going to have a video game on Nintendo, you'd be like, no, there's no way this company's going to have a video game on Nintendo 64. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah. It's just...
Right.
Both are pretty amazing.
Too. Yeah. ECW's heights got higher than TNA has ever gotten. But TNA has obviously chugged along much more consistently for
20 years.
TNA's been around for 20 years. How insane is that?
That is
that's
insane.
nuts.
Yeah, well, let's discuss that quick before we get to like the grand finale of like the actual real Ruthless Aggression era, which is WWE.
Yeah.
Give some love to TNA Wrestling. Impact Wrestling. They in full disclosure, this is also the era that I did some work with them. Not for them, with them. That's a disclaimer. I was never on payroll. Yeah. It's more like an intern, so to speak. When they came to the areas that I was living in, I would help out with the promotions. I would help out with event staff and this and that. They were super, super nice. Actually, the program I was in was run by Alex Emperhentis, is the manager for the Lucha Brothers in AEW. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was like the guy I reported to. I actually was on a conference call once with Jeff Jarrett and Dixie Carter, which was amazing. So
Yeah.
they treated me very, very well. So I'm a little biased for this era of in the 2000s TNA, but to do what they did in terms of like try this experimental weekly pay-per-view, and they marketed it really well. It was $10 for 2 hours.
Yep.
So they marketed it like, hey, you can order the other guys and get 2 hours and 45 minutes for $30, or you can get like, close to 8 hours for $40. Well, that's where I put my money because I was working at the time. Excuse me.
Yep.
But we need to give credit because they completely changed. I feel like they changed wrestling. Not as much as ECW did. Like WWF had to change because they were losing to WCW. They had to change. And they looked, what they're doing is working, but we can tweak it. When TNA was around, they didn't have to do anything, absolutely anything. But then you had AJ Styles and Samoa Joe and Chris Daniels, and Kurt Angle jumped, and Sting he didn't jump, but he made his comeback. Christian jumped. There's a difference between guys that are jumping, like Christian and Angle, and then guys that got released, like the Dudleys, who decided to go there, or guys that left on their own free will, like Booker T's like, I don't want to do this anymore. We had some big
Mick
guys.
Foley.
Yeah, we had big guys jumping to TNA, and dare I say, how long has AEW been around? 5 years? 4 years?
4 years, I think, technically, yeah.
Who has really jumped from WWE to AEW? Moxley?
Like directly to AEW?
Yeah, like
Mox.
I don't want to be here anymore. I'm going. And Danielson.
I would say not Jericho, because Jericho was gone already. He went to Japan, and then he showed up in AEW.
Yeah.
So, you had Mox, you had Danielson.
Mm-hmm.
Because Punk technically was, retired for 10 years or whatever it was.
That would be something similar to what I say Sting did.
With Sting, yep. Exactly. I guess that's
But you don't have Kurt Angle, a guy that main evented WrestleManias. Oh, I guess Daniel. Yeah. I would say Angle and Bryan kind of similar.
That's fair.
And then you got Booker T. These are Hall of Fame guys that chose on their own to go somewhere else. You haven't had somebody, and Mox is always an indie guy. He's not a WWE guy. Like Van Dam.
No.
Van Dam's not a WWE guy. Van Dam wants to do his own thing. So really, who's jumped? You look at those names, and TNA's got some really good stuff like WCW and
Samoa Joe.
Samoa Joe left. He went to AEW. But I just think a lot of wrestling fans have not given TNA or Impact or whatever you want to call them the credit they deserve. Yeah, they're small, but guess what? You have cable TV. Yeah, you have to have the extended package, but you can find them. They're
or you pay $1 a month and you can watch other episodes online.
Or Pluto TV, which is what I watch. I watch some old stuff and I'm like, God damn, I forgot how good TNA was. And then I had to remind myself, well, they also had a guy with a shark mask pretending he was Steve Austin drinking clam juice. But
that was a great segment. Don't tell me it's not. I loved it.
It was okay. It was okay. But
hey, Stone Cold himself approved it. He said this was great.
Yeah, give me a shell, yeah.
Yeah.
They made an action figure of Shark Boy, and he was in the video game. So guess what? Guess he did pretty darn good for himself.
I first saw Shark Boy on WCW Saturday Night, by the way.
Oh, was he in WCW? You know AJ Styles was in WCW.
I knew AJ Styles was.
Air Styles, they called them.
Air Styles and Air Paris. I don't remember that guy.
No, I remember
Jason Jett, I think Jason Jett.
That was Easy Money in ECW.
There it is. Yep. So I'm trying to think. Yeah, who else from TNA was in WCW other than like the obvious
Skipper.
ones? Skipper was. Yeah. Well, he was a cruiserweight champion. That was that was a big deal.
I feel like A&W was not the root beer, but America's Most Wanted.
America's Most Wanted. They weren't
Chris
in there.
Harris.
No, not that I mean maybe,
knock.
But I mean again. Yeah. All right. If you're a true wrestling fan, you're gonna know what that means. All right. Listen. Let's go ahead and let's go to the mainstay here, WWE Ruthless Aggression, because that's where I started really. I mean, I would religiously watch wrestling every single week. Couldn't get enough of it.
Can I start
we talk about it with.
Can I start with what I told you before we started on the air? My
absolutely.
realization. So the new generation of WWF was your Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon Diesel era. Let's say 93 to 96. Then you had the Attitude Era, like transitioning 96, 97 to 01-ish, give or take. That was the Attitude Era. The Attitude Era had the best storylines and the best characters. Nobody can deny that. Nobody can deny those pops that those guys got. But if you put the matches on mute and you turn off the commentary and turn off the crowd, I'm sorry. Every Steve Austin match is exactly the same. Punch, 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 kick, 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 Luthez press, sprawl outside, rinse and repeat. Same thing with The Rock. Same thing with Taker at that time. The in-ring matches were boring. The new generation had terrible storylines. They had an evil dentist that was stupid. They had a fake Razor Ramon and fake Diesel. Ironically, it's the same guy. But you had Bret Hart versus Hakushi. Sounds terrible. Great matches. Bret Hart versus the 1-2-3 Kid on Raw. Amazing match. Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels would tear the house down. Jeff Jarrett and Razor Ramon would tear the house down. You had good matches in the new generation, and you had good storylines and good characters in the Attitude Era. But if you put them, the best of both worlds together, what do you get, Dan?
You get ruthless aggression.
You get ruthless aggression. The best of both worlds, which is why me and Dan both love this. And the older I get, the more I watch that era, the more I like it. More and more.
Yes. So it was the time of the brand split where basically WWF was like, well, we have no competition, so let's compete against ourselves. And so that's what they did. They had the brand split with Raw and SmackDown, and they were very different shows. Raw was definitely more storyline driven. I guess you would call it kind of that Attitude Era, vibe going for it. Attitude Era-esque, exactly. And then SmackDown was the workhorse show, right? So like, I'll put it to you this way. If each show had a...
me smiling? Because I agree with you 100%, and that's why I liked it so much.
Yes, if each show had a title that represented it in like a championship belt, the Winged Eagle belt would be Raw, and the Intercontinental Championship would have been SmackDown, because that was the workhorse title. SmackDown, hands down, had the best wrestlers.
Yes.
The storylines were okay. I mean, they were fine, but I do remember Raw having better storylines at the time, because I actually didn't watch SmackDown. I didn't have cable, so I couldn't watch it on UPN. So I only watched Raw.
Wait, how did you?
I became a Raw fan.
But how did you not have cable? But if that's on basic TV,
I had satellite. So I had satellite TV to be able to watch TNN, because that's what Raw was on.
Oh yeah, thanks for kicking ECW off the air. A bunch of jerks.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But that's how I watched it, and then it became Spike. But I didn't have cable, so what do you got?
I got this at my most recent Comic-Con. As a original Taz ECW.
Oh, nice
action figure. Sorry, because you mentioned.
Are you gonna take them out of the packaging?
No, you don't let them. I'm not like Zack Ryder. I don't let them breathe. They stay in the packaging.
Hey man, it's all good.
Oh no, wait. Or does Ryder take them out, or does Hawkins take them out?
Is it Hawkins or I don't know.
No, I think Ryder takes them out, and Hawkins keeps them in the package.
That's what you said. That's what you're saying.
Yes, I'm correcting myself.
Ryder lets him breathe.
You mentioned TNN. I got angry, which reminded me of Taz getting angry, because I'm from New York like Taz. Well, you're from New York too, but Metro New York like Taz. So I'm like, oh, I have a Taz figure that I just bought. So
love it. So anyway, so we're talking about how Raw had the better storylines and SmackDown had the better wrestling. I couldn't watch it because I didn't have UPN, and I mean, so were you watching both shows at the time yourself?
I was. But I was more of a SmackDown guy. I would even say, did you watch the
because it was run by Paul Heyman, too.
It was run by Paul. And who was his assistant?
Who was his assistant?
Holy God, how could... It's me. It's me you're talking to.
I don't... is it Dawn Marie?
There you go.
Okay. Again, I wasn't watching SmackDown.
You should just... If I'm getting excited about something, it's the answers are simple. It's Undertaker, it's Dawn Marie, or it's Bret Hart, or the Hart Foundation.
All right. That's fair.
Yes, I'm very simple with my wrestling. Did you watch Velocity by chance? Because that was on TNA.
I did watch Velocity, yes.
Velocity was great.
It was their cruiserweight show.
It was
fantastic.
awesome. It was fantastic.
That's where I was able to see, that's where I first saw Paul London, who I'm a huge fan of. I think he's great.
Ultimate Dragon.
I would see Billy Kidman. Ultimate Dragon was wrestle on there. I remember they would bring some WCW guys to try. Mike Awesome wrestled on there randomly one week.
Yeah. Nunzio.
Canyon wrestled. Chris Canyon wrestled. Nunzio. So you had all these guys. John Cena, I remember wrestled Bryan Danielson on Velocity.
Yes. Yes. It was great. Velocity was great. And I don't know if it's on the network.
Well, again, it was SmackDown's B show. So SmackDown was the B show. Then it became a mainstay show, and it got its own B show in Velocity, and then Raw had Sunday Night Heat.
Which nobody watched.
It was the same thing. Well, it was on MTV, so I would watch it because it would lead into watching WWF Tough Enough, which is one of my favorite shows of all, reality shows of all time.
It was a great show.
Love Tough Enough.
The thing is with Heat, though, I felt like they literally had the same guys on. They had Val Venus, they had Maven, they had the same guy, Stevie Knight Heat. Yep. Stevie Richards.
Raven.
Raven. Oh, man. What? Raven could have...
What a waste.
He could have had a career. He probably still could be commentating right now.
Yeah.
Still could have been commentating. But he thought he had more gas in the tank, but he lost to Tommy Dreamer and he left. But that helped TNA. He was one of the first big guys to leave WWE and go to TNA.
Yes.
But, man, Velocity was great. I was a SmackDown guy. And I'm slightly joking about the Dawn Marie comment, but there is some seriousness to it because it's my favorite. I had my favorite diva and my favorite wrestler on the same show and only on that show. So if I wanted to watch Taker and Dawn, I had to go to SmackDown. But
remember, Taker wasn't there for the first year. He was Raw.
But I'm just saying, like the grand scheme of things, he was SmackDown. Like when did he go?
Yeah.
He went to SmackDown. They did the brand extension right after WrestleMania 18.
Yeah.
And then by 19, he was on SmackDown.
Yeah, he had gotten traded less than a year later. So, I mean, he only had like one or two good storylines while he was on Raw.
Yeah, he had a good match with Jeff Harvey.
That's my favorite Raw match of all time, hands down.
And there's
second favorite Raw match of all time.
There's a joke why I said Jeff Harvey, people. Look it up. Disclaimer.
Yes.
So you said it's your second favorite Raw match of all time. What's your number one?
Well, okay. Second favorite, maybe they're tie. My other favorite match of all time is Ric Flair versus Triple H.
I don't remember that.
Do you not remember that? So Stone Cold Steve Austin came out and said, Triple H, you have to defend your title, but you have to defend it against a former world champion. And at the time, of course, he was with Ric Flair. Ric Flair was managing him. Were they Evolution yet? I think they were part of Evolution. Yeah. It was Evolution at the time. And was like, all right, fine, then I'm going to wrestle my buddy Ric Flair. He's former world champion. He'll lay down for me and I can have a night off.
This, yes.
And then Shawn Michaels was like, no, Rick, you're better than this. And Rick was like, you know what? I am better than this. I'm going to go out and wrestle this guy.
They had such good stuff. During this era. And Triple H gets crapped on for the Golden Shovel era.
I loved it. I loved hating Triple H. I was every month I was like, all right, who's going to beat Triple H?
Like Roman
Reigns.
The
first time. Well, exactly. Yeah. But I remember but the difference was Triple H was on TV every week. I remember the first time I was like, all right, Triple H is starting to kind of dominate here. His first title offense where I was really rooting was against Rob Van Dam at Unforgiven 2002.
I'm so surprised you remember that. I remember that too.
Yep. I'm pretty sure I can remember every single one of his title offenses until he lost.
Well, what?
He lost pretty quickly, but then he got it back.
Yes.
The world championship.
Yeah.
So he defended against Van Dam at Unforgiven. He defended against Kane at No Mercy.
Yep.
He lost at Survivor Series. He won it back, I guess at the Rumble, right?
Armageddon.
Or no, he won it at Armageddon. He defended it against Scott Steiner at the Royal Rumble.
Yep.
He defended the title again against him at No Way Out, I believe, right?
Montreal.
And then he defended against Booker T, which was...
Oh, yeah. I think everybody that just heard that would just shake their head and be like, no. Absolutely not. That's...
Nope. That if he was going to lose the title before he ended up losing it to Nameless, this would have been the time to do it.
Vacant.
Yeah, to Vacant. So anyway, after that, he then went into a feud because Booker T was done. He lost. That was it. I think he moved to SmackDown pretty soon after that.
He did.
Yeah. And so I'm getting a little lost at this point.
No,
So
he didn't.
Then he
didn't because Booker T was tag champions with Van Dam at WrestleMania 20. Van Dam and Booker T
which is when Triple H lost it.
Like the most underrated, like friendly alliance tag team champions of all time.
Agreed. Yeah, 100%.
Like
agreed.
who would dislike Rob Van Dam and Booker T?
Yeah.
Who? Nobody
No,
won.
for sure. No.
He,
I remember.
I can give you the
trying
rest
to
if you
think.
need me to help you.
Okay, yeah.
So
Walk me
after
through.
WrestleMania 19, he was in like in a 6-man tag. They brought back Kevin Nash.
That's
And
right.
that's when
Nash
they started
was his
doing
next
the
big feud.
Yeah, so then they started doing the every other month pay-per-views. His summer was Kevin Nash. He had the Hell in a Cell match with
Which
Kevin
was
Nash,
actually pretty good.
which was very good because it was storytelling. It was better than the one with Finn Balor and Edge at this year's WrestleMania.
Yes.
Then
that
he
was
went
terrible.
into SummerSlam and he was injured, which is where he started to wear the gym trunks, aka I'm off the gas.
the bike shorts.
Yeah, he tore his groin for like 4 months. But Goldberg, he lost to
Yep.
Goldberg. Then he beat Goldberg. Then what did he do? Oh, that's Royal Rumble in 04 with Shawn Michaels and no contest. And then Vacant won the title. And
Yes.
then Vacant lost to Randy Orton at SummerSlam 04. And then good
and
job.
then Orton lost to Triple H. Yep.
Put him down.
Yes.
And then he lost to
Orton
Batista.
lost Triple H.
We just did a year and a half
and then-
booking
yeah.
of Triple H.
We did.
Which
oh
led
my
to
God.
another good Hell in a Cell with Triple H and Batista.
That was a great match. Yes.
Summer of 05. I think I want to say it was Vengeance 05. But that's
I'll say this. As far as, because you talked about Hell in a Cell, it's always associated with The Undertaker, right? Because he was the first one to do it with Shawn Michaels.
Yeah.
I think Triple H is the best Hell in a Cell wrestler that's ever existed.
well, he had that match with Foley too, the career match.
Yes.
And
That's what I'm
No
saying.
Way
Yeah,
Out
Foley-
2000.
He fought Undertaker at WrestleMania 28 in a Hell in a Cell match.
Yeah.
Like, that is Triple H's match.
Yes, it is. I would agree. Character wise, it's
So-
Undertaker, but actual like
Actually participating in it? No,
Yeah,
and I think he's won the most.
he's won a lot of the most matches. But
That's true.
let's just take a moment and realize that we just ran through one guy's 2-year run.
Yeah.
In the 2000s.
Yes.
And we remembered it. We glanced over some things, Katie Vick, but we, for the most part, ran through Triple H, and that wasn't even the show I liked. I watched it.
But is it because that was when we watched it, or is it because it was actually way better than people give it credit for as far as the way it was booked?
I think it's way better than people give it credit for because we came from an era where the world title was a hot potato.
That's true. In WCW, it was changing hands every other week.
Yes, and ECW couldn't get anybody stable towards the end.
Yeah.
It went from Taz to Awesome to Tanaka to Awesome to Taz. Wait, how about that? Taz versus Awesome. All right, you know about that, right?
I do, yeah.
So you had a ECW contracted wrestler leave the company as the world champion with the physical title belt, went to WCW, was going to bring the title on TV. Paul Heyman put a federal injunction in because it was his property. Awesome was still a contracted wrestler, but he wasn't getting paid, which we've discussed in other podcasts of like, well, we would all do the same thing.
Right.
So you had a WCW contracted wrestler fight at a sanctioned ECW event, fighting a contracted WWF wrestler in Taz for the ECW title.
Yep. Yeah.
Great. Could you imagine? And I'm not talking about New Japan and Impact, and no disrespect to them. Could you imagine?
That was a partnership. This was like an uneasy business decision almost.
Yeah, I feel like they had to use a WWF guy because, ECW was still the land of rebels. If you brought in a WWF guy and you have the contracted backing of Vince McMahon, like, all right, we promise that Taz is not going to do anything. Because if he does, you could probably sue us.
Yeah.
And same thing. But on the flip side, if Mike Awesome doesn't do what he's supposed to do and this and that, we could sue you. And Heyman and ECW is probably like, sure, just let our cameras roll and we'll record it. That's never been done. And it will never, ever happen again. That's just
It won't.
the times we were in the 2000s were insane for wrestling. And Taz won the match, by the way. And,
Yes,
and
that I
then
knew.
fought Triple H on SmackDown as a WWF champion.
I do remember that. Yeah, and he almost won, right? Didn't he? Like
He had him
got
in
the false finish, or
It was, to me, Taz's second best match in WWE, other than his debut. Man, was that crowd behind him. That crowd was so
100%.
behind him to he had Taz in the Taz mission. Hello. Taz had Triple H in the Taz mission, and Dreamer came in to try to help him, and then oopsie. It's because Dreamer won the title from Taz. But we're remembering all this, and there's so much content that's out. Like, we can talk about, or I could talk about, because I was a fan in the earlier 90s, I could talk about Hogan's runs, but there wasn't that much content of Hogan. Hogan fought all the house shows, but I can say, all right, Hogan, he beat Slaughter, and then this happened with Undertaker, and then Ric Flair, because there wasn't that much.
No.
Here, we're talking about, just with the Ruthless Aggression era, Raw and Sunday Night Heat, SmackDown, Velocity. There was a ton of content, and we all ate it up. It was the best brand extension they've ever done, because it really felt like
two separate shows.
It felt like if you were watching baseball. Now, I can't even use that as an example, because there's a DH in both leagues. I'll get on a soapbox about that in another episode, but it felt like it was different. You were watching sports entertainment on Monday, and you're watching pro wrestling. They were still on Thursday, right? Thursday. American League, National League, pitchers batting, the DH. It felt different, and that was the only time it ever felt truly different.
Do you want to know what else, too? And I just thought about this.
Sure.
It was the last time in WWE history where they were not relying on nostalgia to drive numbers. Think about that.
True. Yeah, you're right.
After the Ruthless Aggression era, they would always go, remember the Attitude Era? They would bring back Attitude Era guys for a pop. Ruthless Aggression was the last time you had these guys, and this was the focus. They weren't relying on big acts from 10 years prior, because it was the new generation, quite frankly. Nobody wanted to see it anyway. But after the Ruthless Aggression era ended, to this day, WWE has constantly cashed in on nostalgia. They'll have the classic Raw night, or they'll have old logos. They'll bring back old wrestlers from the 90s and have them beat current wrestlers and just make them look like fools.
Yep.
But they didn't really do that, and a little bit. Like there's one wrestler I remember they brought back for a segment in Ruthless Aggression was Jake the Snake Roberts. And that was for Randy Orton's when he was basically on his way to fight Undertaker at WrestleMania 21.
Well, what about when they brought back Roddy Piper?
It's true. Yeah. So Piper, yes. But what else? I mean,
but it was
Hogan,
but it was to further somebody. Roddy Piper
that's the thing. It wasn't just a one-off. Yeah. You know what I mean? It wasn't like that right there is very different than having D-Generation X come out in a Jeep tank in 2020 or whatever. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So
what you're saying is correct, though. It was to further a storyline and a one-off. Jake Roberts didn't come back and beat Randy Orton, or even try to compete with Randy Orton.
With him.
No, he was like, I'm here to warn you that you're gonna get your ass kicked.
Yeah.
And it was good. And then Roddy Piper was there to feud with Hogan and with McMahon to further that storyline and help out Sean O'Hare, which I think was clearly underrated.
They weren't taking a main event spot. They weren't, you know what I mean? Like it was a separate thing. They were, exactly. I mean, you think about that, like, again, just talking about Hogan in the Ruthless Aggression era, that dude was a mid-card. He was not, he had a very brief title run, but he was never seen as a true main eventer like he was in WWF, in WCW. He was a mid-card, just one of the guys. And I remember specifically, like, on the video games, when you had the wrestlers had their rankings, Hulk Hogan was in the 80s.
He was like an 85, 86 or something like that.
Yeah, all the main eventers were like 95. Like Triple H was probably, I think, the top at that
99.
point in those games. He was a 99, whatever he was. 96, I think he was. Undertaker was like a 95.
Lesnar was up
Hogan
there.
was like an... Yeah, but like Hogan, Ric Flair, all these older wrestlers were not treated. They were treated like older wrestlers, which is funny because the age they were then is, you see some wrestlers now that you'd want to watch wrestle. Like Undertaker is older than they were by almost 10 years in some instances, as far as when they were considered quote unquote past their prime, and yet people were wanting to see Undertaker now. So
I just want to see him walk to the ring. I don't want to see him wrestle. Love him,
well,
but I don't want to see him wrestle. But like AJ Styles is like 43. Like, guy is in ridiculous shape, but he's like the same age Hogan was like around this era that we're talking about.
So Hogan was 50 in WrestleMania 18 when he fought The Rock.
Okay.
But even 50, like a 50-year-old Triple H was wrestling consistently. Yeah. Remember? Like he was, because he's what now? 53 or 54, something like that?
Something like that.
Like he was having matches and he looked a hell of a lot better than Hogan did.
Yeah.
Now that's for probably other reasons as far as Hulk Hogan's injuries over the years and things like that. But still, like but anyway, the point being is back then they weren't seen for the most part as a credible threat to the top guys in the company. Whereas now, you know, you could very easily, if Triple H didn't retire for his health reasons, you could very easily see him coming in and dethroning Roman Reigns, right?
Or
like
in the tournament for the new World Heavyweight title.
The new whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I can't be Roman trophy.
Exactly.
Participation trophy. You tried.
There it is. Oh man. All right. Well, listen.
One thing I want to touch on, we have not at all in this, is quickly just the women's revolution supposedly happened 5 years ago. BS.
No,
it happened with
women's wrestling. I mean, Lita, Trish Stratus,
Jazz,
Victoria, Jazz especially.
Molly.
She was great. Molly Holly. I mean, you had Stacey Keeler and Tori Wilson, but they were still kind of the eye candy.
No,
you know what I mean?
You had your divas, Stacey.
Yeah.
Tori, Jackie Gata, Dawn, Terry Runnels. Those were your eye candy. But then you had women that could actually wrestle.
Yeah.
And then TNA even took it a step further with their women's division. Gail Kim, Awesome Kong.
Yep.
This was the era.
Mickey James.
The Ruthless Aggression era, or the Ruthless Aggression time period in TNA, led to the women's revolution that we have now with great women's wrestling, but it all started during this era. That could probably be a whole show too, is just how the women in, 2005 were vastly different than 1995.
Yes, and vastly different from women in 2020 and 22. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there's also a reason why Trish Stratus is able to hang with the likes of Becky Lynch, because she was really damn good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas you pick a random female wrestler from like the early to mid 2010s, and honestly, I can't even name more than 5 of them.
Yeah.
I don't think any of them could hang in the ring. Like, I feel like it kind of went back down again for a little bit before it flew back up. I think NXT was a big part of it getting really good again.
100%. And we could certainly do a whole nother show just on the evolution of women's wrestling in this time period.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, listen, man, we could talk hours about wrestling. In fact, our friendship was pretty much built on talking about wrestling for hours.
Yes.
So, I mean, I love talking wrestling with you, man. It's one of my favorite things to do. But I think we should. This is a good stopping point because we kind of covered what we loved about wrestling in the early 2000s. But I'm looking at a spreadsheet you made with literally dozens of other topics we could talk about. We'll probably save a lot of these for either YouTube or maybe if I set up a Patreon. Hint, hint.
Oh.
We'll get them on there for our fans to listen to. But yeah, man, no, that's I think that's gonna wrap it up. In closing, I want to ask you 2 things.
Sure.
And I'll give you my answers too. I want you to tell me your number one favorite wrestler and your favorite wrestling video game, and 3 things.
Okay.
And your favorite wrestling event of the early 2000s.
So I'm only going to 05?
We'll go to 08.
Okay.
If that helps.
Oh boy.
You want to just do 05? Did you already have something planned?
I'll give you a few because it would take me a while. So Survivor Series 02 from the Garden, the first Elimination Chamber, is a fantastic pay-per-view from beginning to end. WrestleMania 20, obviously I was there. It's a great memory me and my father had together. ECW One Night Stand 1. So 05, the original one.
It was 05.
Was still the best. Wrestler of the time period of that 2000 moving onward, it's got to be Van Damme. And then what was the last question? The video game?
Favorite wrestling video game
of the oh boy, jeez, that one's really hard. I am gonna be weird. I don't know when it formally came out, but it has 2000 in the name. I'm in the minority that I put more time because of just where I was in life with friends into WrestleMania 2000. So I actually have No Mercy is a better game, but I have way more nostalgia for WrestleMania 2000 on N64.
All right, fair enough. Listen, that's there's no wrong answers here, obviously.
Yes, so that's why I say my Power Ranger videos. There's no wrong answers.
Yes, there's no wrong answers. Exactly right. That's right. By the way, Lou is our resident Mighty Morphin Power Rangers expert, folks. Yes. If you want to check out some of that stuff on our YouTube channel.
I have layers.
All right. Yes.
I'm like an ogre.
So for me, you are like an ogre, like an onion.
Yes.
So for me, my favorite wrestling event, if I had to pick one, because I agree, there's a few that I love. I think my favorite wrestling event, though, of that time period has got to be WrestleMania 19.
Great pay-per-view. Yep.
And I was up in the air because I was either going to say 19 or 18 because I love 18 as well.
Just wait,
it's hard to beat.
I know we got to wrap up. I was on Reddit and they showed something of like a big moment from Carlito just came back for a run-in.
I did.
At the back
I
leg.
saw that. Yeah,
That pop was massive. But you know what was missing? Flash bulbs. Go back and watch WrestleMania 18, Hogan and Rock's entrance in the stare down, and all those flash bulbs are going off.
Mm-hmm.
And then watch Carlito's return, which is still fantastic. But man, when you grew up with those flash bulbs in the crowd told
that's
you.
when he knew something big was going to happen.
There you go. And even in
now,
actual sports too. Guy, when Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa were going to break the home run record, every single pitch there were cameras going off. Aaron Judge just broke the American League home run record last year. If you had it on mute and you didn't know what was happening.
Look as significant.
Nope. Yeah. All right, I'm done. Finish up. I'll mute my mic. See, look.
There you go. All right. So he's talking. So one of those WrestleManias is going to be my favorite. My favorite wrestler of the time. Oh man.
I just realized I have to respond to your answer. So
I'd like a reaction.
Yes.
I think so am I allowed to count TNA?
Sure, why not?
Because it was to 08. All right, I know Samoa Joe.
Oh, Samoa Joe. Yeah. He was that was when he was a monster too.
Yes, I would say Samoa Joe. But if we're talking mainstream, probably Booker T, because I always love Booker T's matches, even in WCW. Favorite wrestling game? Again, this is one that is not controversial.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's going to be SmackDown. Here Comes the Pain.
Fantastic.
Because I put the most time into that wrestling game of any other wrestling game, hands down. I remember I got it. It was the first wrestling game my parents bought me. And it was for my 16th birthday party, or my birthday. They bought Here Comes the Pain for me, and I literally, for the next month, like 3 hours a day minimum, would play that game.
Great game.
Amazing game.
Yep.
We played it together a couple times, I think, in college.
Yep.
So.
Now I'm muting myself so you can wrap up, okay? See?
Awesome. There you go. All right, cool. Well, listen, guys, that is going to wrap it up for us. Thank you so much for listening or for watching. If you're checking this out on YouTube, I don't know when it's going to go up on YouTube, but obviously this show is going to be coming out a week from tomorrow. So we're recording this on the 9th. You'll be hearing this on the 17th of May. And so thank you guys so much for listening here. And listen, if you like the show, sometimes we do deep dives on topics like this where we just really go down that rabbit hole and geek out about a topic that we've been very passionate about. Sometimes I like to cover topics that are just generalized. So, for example, last week, if you're listening to this live, last week, Beth and I did an episode all about TV moms of the 90s, right? We didn't go too deep, but we just, kind of reminisced. So we'll have stuff like that on here. Really, it's the show. What are you doing, Lou? He's like flashing his action figure on screen this whole time. Anyway, so check it out. And if you know people that grew up in this time period that just want to hear people, have fun and just reminisce, that's really what this is. I've gotten a lot of feedback from people. And one of the thing I've heard most is it just feels like two friends hanging out and shooting the shit. And that's really what it is. And it's talking about simpler times and what it was like to be a part of those times. And so if that's your thing, well, obviously, if you're listening to this, I hope that's your thing. But if you know other people where that's their thing too, let them know about the show. Have them check us out on YouTube or have them just check us out on wherever they're listening to podcasts already. And I always forget to do this, but we have a shop. We got a merch page with t-shirts and all kinds of cool stuff. The link for that will be in the podcast description at the bottom. So check that out if you're in the mood to support the cause. We've got some great t-shirts and hoodies and whatnot. You can check those out. And but at the very least, leave a review, tell a friend, and that's how we're going to keep growing with this, guys. So thank you so much for listening or watching. And I really appreciate it. Lou really appreciates it. We're doing this. It's a labor of love, but it's a ton of fun. And I hope we can just keep doing it. So thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Goodbye.